Hello all, this is Barbara Mann from Your Empowered You, and welcome to our video on how to remove silos in any department or organization. So in this video we're going to be talking about what I mean by organizational silos, how do we recognize silos, understanding how the interconnections amongst teams, departments within an organization impacts one another, how to actually break down those silos, and then finally the importance of aligning goals. So let's talk about what I actually mean, and for those of you who don't know what I mean by organizational silos and their impact. So really the definition of silo mentality is a mindset that occurs in organizations which is inward looking and resists sharing information and resources with other people or departments within the organization. So it is basically what you're doing is you're kind of hoarding the info to yourself, and it kind of starts a silo thinking, silo vision, and you're not working obviously together in terms of the good of the entire department or organization. Now that definition sounds a little kind of like selfish, and sometimes those organizational silos in a department or a team, sometimes they're not even intentional. They're sometimes intentional and they're sometimes not intentional. So I don't want it to sound like it's a very, negative thing and everyone's hoarding information, because sometimes these silos really aren't intentional. What I have seen though is that oftentimes, because departments, maybe they don't understand the interconnection, they tend to blame one another why one department isn't doing better than another, or one department is hindered because this department is impacting them. And there's assumptions made about, say, other departments because we don't fully understand the operation. So there's definitely some negative impacts that occurs when you have silos. It infects your employees, because if there are gaps in your operation where one may have an opportunity versus another, it's going to impact the employees because maybe they can't realize the full potential for what they're actually doing. It definitely will impact customers, because if your departments aren't working together harmoniously, your customers will definitely see that impact in one way or another. It impacts the resources. So maybe there's some shared resources that need to be shared amongst the departments, that maybe one's hoarding the others, and maybe department is hoarding resources that another one needs. So it impacts all the resources. And finally, there are significant financial consequences if departments aren't working together and understanding that connection. And I'll give an example a little bit later of a financial consequence that actually happened in my own operation. So really, let's talk about understanding the interconnection. So in every organization, whatever it's a big or a small one, whatever it looks like, those teams are dependent upon one another. You cannot have a fully successful organization without all those teams firing on all cylinders, really working together, collaboratively, harmoniously, understanding how each one is dependent and impacting one another. So when one isn't reaching their full potential, how can the other one reach its full potential? It can't. So it's very important that each of these teams or each of these departments, they understand how each is working together. I mean, usually people understand from kind of a higher level, but when you really start digging down on how they really, truly are all dependent to make it fully functional, then you start really understanding why it's important to break down those silos. So I'm going to give an example of something that happened actually in my own experience when I was managing an insurance operation. So my background is in insurance. It's my definite wheelhouse. And, even for me with many years experience, you don't fully understand what other departments do until you start kind of asking questions, diving into it, seeing how things are impacting your own department so that you can manage it to its full potential. But let me give you an example. So for me, I managed an insurance claims operation. So for a claims operation, it's kind of the the tail end of what a customer needs. So mine was auto claims. They get in an auto accident and they file a claim, and that's what my department handled. Well, it is very important that the sales and marketing team make sure that they sell the right product to the customer and explain things thoroughly, because what happens is that when someone's involved in an auto accident and they have to file a claim, they understand what will happen on the claim side. Well, a lot of times, a lot of people don't understand what happens on the claim side, or they don't understand what their insurance covers, what it doesn't cover, things of that nature. So there's a definite connection there of how sales and marketing impacts a claims organization. Another example, my department, the claims organization, okay, what we did is we did investigations and we determined liability, who was at fault for accidents, and if we were not at fault, if our customer wasn't at fault, our policyholder, we would send it to what's called the subrogation department. And all that means is that they would seek recovery on behalf of our policyholders. Well, if we didn't do a thorough investigation, or say we didn't get a statement, or say we didn't get good photos, or say something was missing, that impacted the subrogation department's ability to recover the money. So there's a definite connection to them, and they have their goals. They had their goals and objectives of recovery money that they needed to meet, and we impacted them. So if we didn't, and so basically, when we didn't do our job as well as we needed to, the impact of that department was in the millions. In the millions. And people don't understand, how they're impacting one another until, you start talking about it. And we're going to talk a little bit later how you sort of break down these silos and when people start understanding that impact. My department also impacted the sales and service. So sometimes in my claims department, our adjusters would send it over to sales and service and say, oh, contact them and they'll sort out your rates. Well, that didn't help them any, actually. That just kind of shuffled off a problem that they had no idea about. And so they would be upset at our department. So you have sort of these tensions amongst departments, and if you don't have some sort of feedback loop or some sort of communication amongst the departments, it really can get hostile and not run as smoothly, and that is not good for the entire organization. It's not good for the customer. It's not good for the employees. Another example, within my own department, I had different teams of adjusters. So we had liability claims departments, we had bodily injury claims departments, we had litigation claims departments. And if these two departments weren't talking to one another and telling each department what they needed to make it easier for them to have a better type of settlement, it impacted them. So one of the things that we constantly worked on are communication protocols and managers talking to one another from the various teams on what they needed from the other teams. And not in a mean way, not in an accusatory way. It was meant just to open up communication so that people knew what they needed before they sent over a claim to another department. Okay, it was what did the other department need to help them have a better recovery, have a better settlement, things of that nature. So it was very helpful, because if you don't communicate these things, people are going to continue to do what they think is the correct thing to do. Okay, and if you don't communicate this, it just keeps happening, right? It's common sense. You got to start talking about it. So how do you get the message out? So here's a few things that, in my experience, it worked. You can have educational meetings amongst the department. So you can have formal meetings, informal meetings. They can be led by leaders or individual contributors. So a lot of times I had monthly branch meetings with my entire staff, and I would invite people from different departments, whether it was policy services, subrogation, sales, and they could tell us what those impacts were in terms of if something was deficient from my team. So an example, a subrogation person came and talked at one of our meetings, and they gave us a bunch of facts and figures on how much do they collect, how much is missed on recovery because, say, investigations weren't complete, and it was in the millions. It was in the millions. And when my staff heard this, you could just see their eyes light up. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. And it helped them to understand what they needed to do in order to help those recover, which helped the organization. Another example, I was able to put together a training presentation that I did for all of the sales and service organization. And what I talked about was the pain points for our customers, which is out-of-pocket expenses. Again, this is insurance. This was an insurance discussion, and out-of-pocket means things like deductibles that people had to pay, any kind of out-of-pocket for rental issues that they may have had to pay. And what I did is we had data to show, when someone had a higher deductible, higher out-of-pocket expense, our customer service numbers went down. So obviously there's a direct correlation between what sales is selling a customer. If they're selling a higher deductible, most likely that customer service was going to be lower. That doesn't really help the customer. So kind of showing data and showing customer service numbers, and then also showing them actual comments from surveys basically talking about out of pocket, or hey, I pay a premium, I pay a high premium and I still had to pay out of pocket. Showing them information, showing them how many claims that we processed, how much money in claims we process. You can see these light bulbs going on, and giving real life scenario type of claims where what they did, what their sales team, what they were doing, how it impacted us. And also favorable stories where someone sold them, a great policy that really helped protect the customer. You obviously want to share the great stories as well. But what it did was it put real life into what they were selling to their customers. And it was an educational meeting. It wasn't accusatory. It was just more of, here are the kind of the facts. Here are some graphs. Here's what happens when there's a lot of out of pocket. Here's some of the comments. Here's some real life claim scenarios, and putting like a story behind what they were selling with real life policyholders. Really kind of, again, it was one of the best. This is what their feedback was. It was one of the best sessions that they had, because they finally had a meeting from the claims perspective, on what their impact was to the customer. So, again, that was a formal type of meeting, but you can have informal meetings. You can invite someone from another department. A lot of times individual contributors, the ones doing the work, are the most powerful versus a leader doing it. And they can tell you what they need. And again, if they come with facts, numbers, visuals, all those sorts of things, it puts a story behind it. There's real life behind it. One of the important things, though, that we also need to break down the silos is you can have the communication, and you can have the training sessions, and I would encourage them to be on a regular basis and not just a once a year kind of thing and then everyone forgets about it. You need to have feedback loops amongst these departments. So how do you have the feedback loops? Is it done digitally? Is it done verbally? Is it done via meetings? Is it done via the leaders? It's very important to have some sort of feedback loop amongst the departments so that they can talk and identify gaps in those silos. It's important that you obviously follow up on that feedback. So that's, you have one department saying, hey, here's what we're seeing as an opportunity, and if nothing's done, it creates a resentment still. It doesn't help any kind of silo management, okay? So another key way to break down silos is goal alignment. So every department, every team has their little goals, right? Now, the problem with this is that if it's not done in a holistic fashion, it may create unintentional silos that the goals compete with one another and they adversely impact other departments. So an example might be, say you have a sales department and their goals are to sell, X amount of policies, and, they have a phone criteria of X amount, and, maybe they are doing well on those goals, but maybe what they're selling may not be the best product for the customer, and then it impacts the customer service numbers, it impacts the customer retention numbers, so you want to make sure, obviously, that the departments have goals. They have aligned goals, so there's not this unintentional, a lot of times it's unintentional silos going on. So this is usually more to senior management levels. You want to make sure those goals are aligned, so you don't have departments competing against one another to try to hit these goals at the compromising this other department. So you want to identify when those are created, and this is usually, when managers identify this and understanding how things are working together. Identify when these are created and work to remove them, especially through goal alignment and open communication. I can't stress that enough. You got to have great communication that is receptive, it's transparent, it's honest, all those sorts of things. So let's wrap this up in a bow. I could talk about this topic all day long. I love talking about it, but let's wrap this up in a bow. Some of the key points we talked about. Silos, they can be created amongst departments and amongst teams. So it could be amongst a team, right? Could be amongst a department, and then obviously between departments. Most of the time when I see is that it's within a department and between departments. It could have significant consequences. Customers are impacted when you have sort of silo organizations. You have financial consequences. Your employees are going to be impacted. So you want to make sure that the departments understand those impacts with one another. How are they interdependent? How are those wheels turning together to make it work? When we have figures and graphs and communication and a feedback loop, it really helps people understand how things are working together. So if you have one department that is, like in my claims department wasn't say completing their entire investigation, it created an impact of $1 million on another department. That's significant. That's huge, right? But when you bring that to life and you have facts and figures, it really helps one department want to do that good job. They want to get that $1 million back, or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact number. They want to take pride in their work so that they have something that is great to get the recovery back. So you start having this great communication where everybody wants to really truly work together, right? Because that's what it's all about. And whenever you're working for a company and organization, it's all about how do we work together towards a common goal, right? Your meetings, whether it's, your feedback loops or educational meetings, they can be formal, they can be informal, they can be a formal training session. You can bring somebody in for 15 minutes to talk at a team meeting. But it's important that you give people the opportunity, especially individual contributors who are doing the work, give them the opportunity to explain the impact of one has on one another. It really helps them be the subject matter expert, the SME, of the group. Feedback loops are important. You got to have the feedback loops. You got to have open communication. And when you have a feedback loop, you act on it, obviously. If you're not going to act on it, tell the department, right? Have that communication. And then finally, we talked about the alignment of goals. Goals sometimes create unintentional silos. So you want to keep breaking down and making sure your goals are truly aligned amongst the teams and amongst the departments and amongst the organization. Very, very, very important. That's the biggest thing on how to remove silo type of organizations. So I hope you've enjoyed our short video on removing silos in your organization, recognizing them and addressing them. And for additional resources or to schedule a session with me, please visit my website at www.yourimpoweredyou.com. You can email me at bman@yourimpoweredyou.com or give me a call at 916-633-2555. And I thank you very much and have a very empowered day.